You want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Well, we're giving you the Michigan Sports Truth, the show that is honest, reveals the facts, truth, and statistics, and does not mess around. Follow me, Taylor Phillips, on Twitter at DT2Phillips. Email me at TaylorGatorPhillips14@yahoo.com. Follow Ed Smith on Twitter at EdSmith313, and go to our website at MichiganSportsTruth.com. Also like our Facebook page, The Michigan Sports Truth, and join our Facebook group with the same name. The Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker is also available on iHeartRadio and SoundCloud. Also a subsidiary of Sports Radio Detroit, thus available on iTunes and Podbean. This podcast is particularly not for entertainment purposes, and the views expressed by the host of this podcast are opinion-based. However, they do not come without facts, research, statistics, and truth, whether other people like it or not, and no matter how harsh or complicated it may be. This is the Michigan Sports Truth, and nothing can ever stop it from being correct.
And this is episode 273 of the Weekend Review of the Michigan Sports Truth podcast on Spreaker. Taylor Phillips along with Buck, Geno, and Frank Vajcner both filling in for Ed Smith, still out due to private personal reasons. But you can follow them on Twitter at Buck Geno III, Buck Geno III in Roman numerals for the third, and Frank Vajcner at Frank_Vajcner. Of course, I'm Taylor Phillips. How you gentlemen doing this week?
With work and getting back to working football games, but I'm doing well.
Uh-huh. Awesome. How about you, Buck?
Doing all right. Happy that the All-Star break is over, so we have something to talk about. And I'm sure that we'll get into that here shortly, but glad to have some sports going on here with the All-Star break and not much else going on.
Not much indeed. Just Tigers getting back in action, taking 2 of 3 from the Blue Jays. They started off slow on Friday, losing 7-2. Justin Verlander pitched his heart out. Steve Bauer pointed that out. It seems as if Justin Verlander just wants to be traded like pretty damn soon, regardless of the cost and regardless of his no trade clause. I'd say Verlander has to waive his no trade clause if he wants to get traded. That's about the only option. The other option is can any other team pay Justin Verlander $20 million per year, or the rest thereof, also including that $22 million option for 2020.
Well, that's what we've talked about now for the last 2 weeks. Is Verlander certainly has been at least mentioned in trade talks, but the ownership's their reluctance to eat any of that salary and demanding the package that they are in return just makes it very difficult for teams, even with teams that have deep pockets, such as the Cubs and perhaps other LA Dodgers. It's going to make it really difficult. So if they want to trade Justin Verlander, it's something that they feel that they can do to get the team to eventually move forward and rebuild, or at least restock that core in the farm system, they're going to have to come up with some cash, because there aren't very many teams that are going to want to provide you an attractive package for a guy who's going to be getting $28 million a year up till he's almost 40, and give you also in return a package of premium prospects and or major league ready players. So that's going to be the difficulty, and I know that over the course of this last week and a half or so, Michael Fulmer was mentioned as well. I think that was the Cubs coming back, or at least somebody that was involved in trade talks with Al Avila coming back and saying, all right, well, we don't want the guy who's really expensive. What can we get for the guy who's really cheap and is very young and under team control? And I don't think there was a lot of merit to those rumors. I think people tried to make a lot of something that was really nothing there, because Al Avila, say what you will about his roster construction and some of the moves he's made, to really to trade Michael Fulmer for anything at this point would be foolhardy, simply because he's under their control for a very long time in terms of salary. And the haul that he would return would be just as unproven as he was when he first came to Detroit. There was a lot of people that were high on him when he came over in the Cespedes trade, but he still wasn't proven. A lot of people don't remember that he was the last guy out of the four that returned in this Mets trade that they thought were going to do anything. Boyd and Norris were rated higher than Michael Fulmer, so that's something to bear in mind as well. But I just don't think there was a lot to that. They probably countered with Michael Fulmer to see if Al Avila had anything in mind, but I just don't think that's the right move at all. And Al Avila, even if he wanted to trade Michael Fulmer, wouldn't be able to get equal returns simply because you don't even know truly what you have in Michael Fulmer yet. Yes, he's had an all-star season.
And speaking of Michael Fulmer, it was reported to the media that he feels confident that he won't get traded by the.
We're just going to trade him because we don't know what we need to get somebody else in here. I mean, he's part of your rebuild.
Oh yeah, Michael Fulmer has been a great pitcher. He was the Rookie of the Year last year. He's had his ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys, but Michael Fulmer still keeps on proving why he's your next ace on that starting pitching rotation.
Well, one thing I have heard is there are people saying that Fulmer should be traded because it'll add some speed to the rebuild process, which so badly needs to happen in Detroit, because you could actually get a nice return for him. And then there are others that say no, because he's still not that proven of a commodity yet. I've heard both sides of the argument, and honestly, right now, I'm leaning more towards you're going to want to keep him because I think if you trade him, you could get somebody for him, but that, kind of like Buck said, that prospect you get isn't going to be proven very well, and who knows how that's going to turn out. So I think I'll just go back to what I had said previously and say, if you're going to trade.
Well, if you want to trade him, if I'm the GM that's going to get Michael Fulmer in a deal, I got to wonder why I'm getting him at this point. Under team control for, I believe, 3 or 4 more years. Coming off a Rookie of the Year campaign, now an all-star. I'm thinking, okay, if I'm able to get him now, what is there that I'm missing? There's got to be a reason that I'm able to get a young player at the level of Michael Fulmer at this time of his career. There's got to be something. And so that would lead me to believe that either A, the Tigers know something that nobody else does, which I don't think is the truth, or the fact that the Tigers are so desperate to restock that core that they're willing to give up somebody that could be a part of that core in 3 to 5 years. And a lot of teams like to take, if you get a desperate team, that's the best time to make deals with them, because they'll pretty much do anything they can to get players that they want. And I just don't think the Tigers are at that stage yet. I don't think they're desperate enough to start making deals that don't make a ton of sense. Now, we'll see here in the next 15 days what happens. I still think that J.D. Martinez will be traded. I still think that Justin Wilson will be traded. And I still think, and I don't know why there hasn't been much more talk about it, but I still think Shane Reed would be an excellent trade candidate simply because of his age and his performance. I don't know why there isn't a whole lot of talk around him, seeing as the Washington Nationals made a trade today to get two guys who really, Sean Doolittle and Ryan Madsen, who aren't that great. Plus, they signed K-Rod 3 weeks ago, and they ended up releasing him from his minor league contract this week. So the Nationals, I feel like they're trying to get by on the cheap because they know they're going to have to pay a big contract here sooner rather than later with Bryce Harper. But at the same time, is he going to want to re-sign a big contract with you if you can't get out of the wild card round? And so the Nationals and Mike Rizzo, are really kind of scratching here to see what they can do to kind of put a Band-Aid on their bullpen and try to do it without going to get somebody that's going to cost them a lot of money or term down the road. And I think that's what Detroit has to look at too, is who they're going to be trading off. I mean, there's guys that you might be trading for, kind of like a Cespedes deal in 2015 with J.D. Martinez, where teams are going to be a little bit weary now that they got Michael Fulmer, Daniel Norris, and Matt Boyd out of that trade. If I'm a team, is J.D. Martinez worth 3 good prospects? And that's really the question that those teams are going to have to ask. The trade market has been relatively lukewarm. There hasn't been a whole lot of hot rumors, so to speak, that have been passed around. And it'll be interesting to see the last 2 weeks what the Tigers are able to get, because if they go through this trade deadline and get nothing or very little, then the fans, such as us, are going to have a right to be a little bit frustrated and actually get an explanation as to why a team that is still well below 500 heading into July 31st is not making deals.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the latest rumors I had heard was, I believe it was J.D. Martinez to the Colorado Rockies. Now, look, what kind of return would you get from Colorado for Martinez?
Yeah, Colorado's farm system, it's not that great. It's not as bad as the Tigers, I don't think, but if you're Colorado, it's going to be hard to justify trading for J.D. Martinez when you already have an established outfield, and there is no designated hitter in the National League. So you're going to have to find a place for him to play and hit on a consistent basis. I think that if a team was going to trade for him, it would have to be a team that has a specific need for a corner outfielder. Now, the names that I've heard passed around are the Diamondbacks, the Brewers. Those are teams that could use another corner outfielder and have good prospects, the Brewers especially. The Brewers actually have somebody, I have to double check on the name here now, I didn't think I was getting this deep, but they actually have a pretty good prospect in center field that's buried right now behind 2 other players. And if they could get somebody like that in return for J.D. Martinez, it would help them in the long run fill that void in center field, as well as some other players in return from Milwaukee, who has a pretty decent farm system. And right now in the NL Central, which is surprisingly still kind of wide open at this point of the season, the Brewers may think that J.D. Martinez could be the bat that could help them over that hump.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, even you mentioned the Diamondbacks as well. I guess I forget who it was. Somebody had mentioned on Twitter that if the Tigers were to trade J.D. Martinez to Arizona, they were hoping to get Robbie Ray back, which that'll never happen.
No. And the thing that people love to forget is that Robbie Ray trade ended up netting the Tigers just as fair a return. So, yes, to get him, it wasn't a popular trade, but then the trade back, or the trade him to the Diamondbacks, that did net them something. So it's hard to say that it's a buyer's remorse thing with Robbie Ray, because at the time they didn't know what they had with him. and it was going to be hard to really justify keeping him in the rotation at the time of his career that they had him, and that for that 1 year in 2014. So it's difficult to say that the Tigers didn't win out on that deal because they ended up getting Shane Green, who was a valuable bullpen piece, and that's, for a team that was starved for that type of player, it was an excellent trade to get Shane Green. And bear in mind, Robbie Ray, in his short time in Detroit, was not that good. He was 1-4, the ERA above 8. His WHIP was near 2. Now again, his development was not close to being completed. But at the time, Detroit didn't have the luxury, because they were still in that championship window, of developing a young pitcher on their staff. Had they gotten Robbie Ray today, at that age, maybe you can let him hang in the rotation because you're not going anywhere for a while. So, tomato on that trade, but I don't think J.D. Martinez to Arizona is going to net them Robbie Ray, especially with the way he's been pitching this season. And the other thing for that is there's other players on that Diamondbacks club that either have played in the major leagues this year or are ready to play in the major leagues. And I think that they could go into those prospects and expect to get something back rather than trying to cover for a trade that people didn't like 3 years down the road.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the trade deadline heard around the world that the Tigers definitely missed out on. The Chicago Cubs traded 7 prospects to the Chicago White Sox for Jose Quintana. 7 prospects. That's what Avila could have taken in any kind of trade, whether it be Justin Verlander, Justin Wilson, J.D. Martinez, Alex Avila. His name was thrown out there too. Well, earlier, about 3 weeks ago, but.
Well, the thing about that trade between the Cubs and the White Sox, I don't believe that one of the prospects that the Cubs gave up was Ian Happ, who I believe is the top guy in their system, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah, they got Eloy Jimenez, which was the player that most people had targeted for the Tigers or anybody else going to be trading to the Cubs. They also got Dylan Cease, who is a right-handed pitcher. And then they also got a couple of lower minor league prospects, Matt Rose and Brian Fleet. So Eloy Jimenez, the centerpiece, and I think that if the Cubs were going to make a trade for a pitcher, that they had resigned themselves to the fate that Eloy Jimenez was not going to be with them. I was surprised that they got Dylan Cease, and the reason I'm surprised at that is because with the pitching staff that the Cubs have, you got guys that are getting a little bit older. Jay Garrietta, John Lackey, even John Lester to some point. You have guys that are kind of on the back end of their careers. Now, granted, there are other guys that they have also in waiting, but I think that Dylan Cease probably had a pretty good shot at making the rotation in the next 2 to 3 years. And it was interesting to see that they made that trade. And I'll be curious to see what they do down the line, because Jose Quintana, for all of his shortcomings on the south side, still is a viable middle-of-the-rotation pitcher. But I just don't know about the return that they got. And the people that say that Justin Verlander would have gotten more, got to remember, Jose Quintana is a far cheaper asset than Justin Verlander. And also, they are not having to play around with retaining salary and who's paying who and for how much and how long. So I feel that the return was warranted for the Cubs. It's kind of like going into the convenience store, right? You go to buy a jar of peanut butter at Speedway, it's like $6. Why is it $6? Because it's easy and it's right there. You could go to the store and try to get them before they're closed because it's $2.50, but you might not get there. So I feel like that the Cubs paid for convenience because they knew they could get Quintana. He's not a very expensive asset. Even if he were to pitch well and get a new contract, he wouldn't be even close to what Justin Verlander is going to earn. So I think that the Cubs made that decision that said, hey, if we're going to get a pitcher, that's going to basically be a middle of a rotation guy for us. And we're going to give up these prospects. Let's at least make it easy on ourselves by getting somebody who's not going to hit us in the checkbook as hard. So for all the people that said that Verlander would have got a better return or that they should have traded him, you have to remember there's another team on that side of the deal. And Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer didn't get to where they're at by giving away prospects so they can get guys that blow up in their faces. Very savvy front office people. They won the World Series last year, and they've got 3 World Series now between the two of them, with 2 with Boston and now the last one in Chicago. So it's hard for me to say that the Cubs made a bad deal there when the other deal staring them in the face was a possible at least $20 million a year from the Tigers and Justin Verlander.
That one is long.
Yeah, that is true. The Tigers owe Justin Verlander, again, $28 million per year, and then in 2020, $22 million, which is an option. But Jose Quintana, like you pointed out, Buck Geno, it is cheaper than that. That's why the Cubs were pretty conservative and smarter buyers with the White Sox with Jose Quintana than they would have been with Justin Verlander and the Detroit Tigers. I think the Cubs made the right move. So not to sound like a shill, but they did.
We're not being a shill because it's pretty black and white. It's something that when you look at the deal that the Cubs made, it makes a ton more sense than getting somebody like Justin Verlander, who is comparable in age to many of the pitchers that they have currently on the roster. So, yes, it would be great for the Cubs to have Justin Verlander because it would be a big addition. But when it comes down to it, I think that Jose Quintana, even though he's probably not Justin Verlander, he's still a pretty effective pitcher. He's left-handed, which is going to help them out as well to set their playoff rotation. Gives them a little bit more flexibility. And, again, he comes with a much cheaper price tag.
Definitely. So the Tigers sit in 4th place again. Let's get to that team meeting again. That was prior to Saturday's 11-1 rout win over the Toronto Blue Jays. Both the Tigers and Blue Jays, as you look at it, have a record each that's very close to one another. The Blue Jays, after today's 6-5 win over in 11 innings, still have a half-game lead over the Tigers overall in the entire American League standings, non-division wise, but in the entire American League. The Blue Jays 42-49, the Tigers 41-49. It all boiled down to that rubber finale, and it was going to go either way. The tanking process of ours was hoping that the Tigers would lose, but the home field advantage just cooked in a little too much, and the Blue Jays pitching in the end with Lucas Harrell to end with was pretty bad. They threw plenty of balls, enough for Miguel Cabrera to draw that game-winning bases-loaded walk, scoring Alex Avila.
Well, not to mention Miguel Montero of the aforementioned Cubs, who was DFA'd by them earlier in the month for comments, not just for comments that he made after a game in which he gave up 7 stolen bases, but also for declining performance. And I think that today was a clear case of showing why the Cubs were able to cut ties with Miguel Montero. Is I believe the Tigers had 5, or I want to say they had 5 stolen bases. I have to go back and check that, but just running on the Tigers, on the Blue Jays at will, and the one caught stealing was actually an overslide of a base rather than somebody getting gunned out by 2 steps. So I think if you're Miguel Montero, we found out why guys are stealing on you, and it's not because the pitchers are slow to the plate. That said, you talk about the team meeting that they had prior to Saturday's game. I just don't know. I don't really care to know what was said because, at this point, number one, you have a bunch of grown men playing a game, and they know what they have to do to win those games. And number two, does it really make a big difference? I think that the meeting really is made more for show and for optics for what the public perceives rather than what's going to go on in that clubhouse, because you're playing the Toronto Blue Jays, who are just as bad or worse than you. And it would be different if they had a team meeting and went
well, just as bad, not worse. Like I pointed out, they're still a half game ahead of us.
Right. I mean, still, you're looking at a team that it's not very good. We'll just go with that. And
no.
If they would have come out of a team meeting and beat the hell out of the Indians, or maybe the Yankees were in town or something else, somebody that actually mattered and was actually good, then you may have something there. But they're playing the Blue Jays, and I think it was really convenient that they had a meeting when they're playing a team that's not very good. Now, are the Tigers on paper better than the Blue Jays? Yeah, they are. But this is not a paper game. And right now the Tigers, up till after Friday night, came out of the All-Star break flat. And I think that really they just said, hey, if they're going to say anything, it's we got 15 days or 16 days until some of us aren't here. That's going to be the truth. And whether that means that they're going to play out the rest of the season or they want to show the ownership that they still give a crap, whatever the heck that was. Again, it's the Blue Jays. And so I'm not going to put a lot of stock into it. I think that it's nice for people to talk about. But this team is what it is. They could have a meeting every day, and it probably wouldn't change how they're going to finish out much.
And I pretty much second what Buck said. They can have meetings all they want, but it doesn't change the fact that you're still second to last in the American League. In fact, the only team worse than you is the Chicago White Sox by 3 games. And of course, you still play in the AL Comedy Central.
Yep.
Look, kind of like what Buck said. If they would have taken 2 out of 3 from the Yankees this weekend, okay, yeah, maybe I might be able to give that to you and give you some daps, but beating a team that's just as big of a dumpster fire as you, that doesn't prove squat.
No, definitely not. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, the point that comes at the season, you're in July 16th. If you're going to have a team meeting, I'm going to have it before, July 14th is when or 15th is when they had it, but, maybe you want to have it before July 15th, because you knew where this was headed, and you knew where it was going. So, to have a meeting on July 15th, 2 weeks before the trade deadline, excuse me, and try to pronounce it as some sort of coming together, that's just insulting. And like I said, it's great for people to write about. It gives them something to distract from really what's going on, but the Tigers are what they are. And just as Frank mentioned, they're beating a team that's just as bad or maybe worse at this point right now than they are. I know in the standings that they're a half a game behind the Blue Jays, but really the honest truth is both those teams are struggling, and it's not something that really gets me interested. They had a meeting, fantastic, and really after that, they still have 2 weeks before guys are going to get traded, hopefully, and they start their process of getting this team back into what it was for the last 10 years.
Well, definitely, yeah. What else is there to come? It's still a wait and see approach, but you guys may be right. I may have to definitely agree with you. Still have to see what happens, but The Tigers are going nowhere. Neither of the Blue Jays.
No. And the thing is, looking at Toronto, I mean, they've got some pretty bad contracts themselves. And coming into the trade deadline, it's going to be difficult for them because they have a lot of guys who are saddled with some big money and not playing well. And it's going to be difficult to make deals with the type of players that they have. So I think the Blue Jays are squarely in the middle of maybe perhaps trying to get something going for a rebuild as well. And the Tigers are roughly in the same spot. So it is what it is. It's a nice story for the beat units to talk about other than asking Brad Osmus stupid questions. So I guess it gave him something different to write about.
Yeah, that's the story. So let's talk Miguel Cabrera's protection of his family from Venezuela. His quote, "If I go to Venezuela, they'll break me, they'll kill me." The Tigers are on the road for 4 at KC and then 3 at Minnesota. But just for a 7-game road trip. But he was talking about death threats, bribes to protect his mother from kidnapping. This is from Tim Daniels of Bleacher Report. He got that stuff from Evan Woodbury of MLive.com. Cabrera said, I'm tired of paying protection money so they don't kidnap my mother. Rachel Krieger of the Washington Post reported on the dire situation Monday, highlighting the impact of food shortages and 700% annual inflation. It's reached a point where residents must save up for daily necessities, nothing but, noting, quote, a tube of toothpaste costs half a week's wages. Cabrera was among the MLB players who spoke about the problems in Venezuela. He says that they're suffering from starvation, poverty. People are dying in Venezuela, quote unquote. Cabrera, not that Cabrera was saying something that could save Venezuela from hell, but he said that he's staying in America just to keep his family safe, and that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Oh, he's only one person.
Yeah, one thing somebody did is that they've heard about all the stuff he's having to do for his mother. They asked, why doesn't he just why doesn't he just bring her to the United States just so she can stay safe here? I mean, I'm not sure but then again, there might be a lot of red tape he's got to go through there, through immigration and all that stuff, and plus, God forbid, the government down there may not let her leave.
Well, not only that, but again, if he does something, it's going to come out of his own pocket, which I'm sure that he doesn't have a problem with. It really boils down to, for him, what's best for his family, and at this point, obviously weighing on his mind even more than it probably has in years past, but this is something that is not new for the Venezuelan contingent in the Major League Baseball ranks, and it's kind of sad.
Yep. So that's probably about it for that story. Frank, you had anything else to say?
Nope. I mean, honestly, I hope that Cabrera can get that issue resolved quickly, so he doesn't have to worry about any more death threats or any of that BS.
Right. Better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
So that's Tigers talk. Now let's go to some Red Wings talk. So it's actually a developing story based on Tomas Tatar, what he's asking for. Now we boiled it down. We've gotten information. He wants a 7-year deal. He wants $6 million annually. Not $5 million, but $6 million. So 7 years, $6 million a year, that's $42 million total. We've heard multiple reports saying he wants 6 to 7 years at $6 million annually. That was right after the 7-year deal report. So I put those two together. 7 times 6, 42.
The only thing is the Red Wings just aren't going to be able to pay it because again, you got to give Athanasiou a new deal, and that's already going to eat up your cap space. I mean, this is already. I think that's even with putting Johan Franzen on LTIR and
maybe Cronwall as well.
Yeah, I just don't see him being able to do it, and I think they're going to be forced to sign to a 1-year deal worth X amount of dollars.
Arbitration.
Yeah, but I also think that we could see kind of like what the Blackhawks went through with Antti Niemi back in 2010.
Well, not to mention the long-term contracts of Justin Abdelkader, Jonathan Eriksson, Danny DeKeyser, and Darren Helm, and Franz Nielsen too.
Oh yes,
that's all painful, extremely painful.
Yeah. Well, I've heard quite a bit about that from our friend Jeff Moss of the Detroit Sports Rag on Periscope the last couple of nights.
Well, yeah. And I've said this multiple times. I think it's beautiful. I don't think that Tomas Tatar is a 6x7 player. That said, he's going by the value structure that has been set on that team. And if you're going to tell me that the leading goal scorer in 2 of the last 3 years isn't worth that's top dollar, when you get guys that are not pulling their weight, and I've said it before, and it's a dead horse that keeps just getting beaten with all sorts of sticks and bats. Ken Holland's contracts are coming back to bite him in more ways than one. Not only does he have no cap room, but now he's forced to pay a contributing player, somebody that actually is doing something. He's getting backed into a corner with how he's going to have to pay him, whether either he gets a 1-year deal and then loses him for nothing, or is forced to trade him, which I don't think Ken Holland would do, because then that would be him admitting that they don't have a shot at the playoffs, because Tomas Tatar is a valuable part of that team. So he's going to lose him for nothing, because Tomas Tatar is going to take a better deal somewhere else. And it's just another page in the ever-growing journal of Ken Holland's missteps and poor management. And I think it's great that Tomas Tatar is going to ask for this, because, hell, if Gustav Nyquist, who's almost a $5 million a year player, and I've seen different metrics that have Tatar and Nyquist being equal, and, I'd get into that a little bit off air, but really what it means is people are trying to justify already. They're greasing the skids for when Tomas Tatar leaves town. They're going to say, well, we really didn't need him. Because if you look at these stats, and again, that's kind of why I don't buy into 100% of the advanced metrics that are provided, because you can make numbers say what you want as long as you do it the correct way. And for somebody to tell me that Tomas Tatar and Gustav Nyquist are equal players or should be paid equally, that's not going to fly with me, because Gustav Nyquist isn't performing at the same level that Tomas Tatar is. Does Tomas Tatar leave something to be desired? Yeah. He groups his goals together, and he's a very streaky player. But much like Ken Holland has said in the past, you can't just go pick a 30-goal scorer off a tree. And now there's one sitting on his team, and he can't pay him. Because he doesn't have the money, because he's got it invested in crap assets that he thought he had to have, because he thought other people were going to get them. And now all the stuff that he's doing is it's just another series of missteps and misfortune that Ken Howland is bringing upon himself. And I think it's great. I think Tomas Tatar should stick to it, take him right to arbitration, and tell Ken Howland to stick it where the sun doesn't shine, take the arbitrator's 1-year deal, get him to unrestricted free agency, and leave town. Because if anybody's going to get painted, the victim or the enemy in that picture should be Ken Howland. And you've already got it. I mean, I see it every day. People talking about how Tomas Tatar shouldn't be, trying to get more money than he's worth, or that, they don't really need him. These clowns that say that, those are the type of fans or the type of people that support this team that need to go away. Because it's quite obvious to me that Tomas Tatar, for all of his weaknesses, is still probably your, if not your best, your second best player. Simply because he puts the puck in the net. Other guys aren't. So, if you're going to try to sit there and tell me that the guys that already have their contracts in hand have been doing things to earn them, they haven't, and that Tomas Tatar should take his place in line, he shouldn't, then that's the same kind of crap that has been spewed for the last 4 or 5 years, while the Wings lose assets for nothing, or have to trade them away for little to nothing, see Brendan Smith, and continue to perpetrate these lies or these false statements to everybody else out there that they're trying to compete for a championship when you're giving away players that can contribute, or not even finding out if they can contribute.
Or handing out bad contracts to guys who aren't going to do squat.
That's the main thing.
Or handing out bad contracts to guys who have already proven pretty well that they're not that good. Now, do I think that
that's right up.
Well, and do I think that Justin Abdelkader is a good fourth-line player? Yeah, he probably would be great. He's okay. He's an okay checking forward, and he is NHL talent. He doesn't have 7 years at $4 million talent. You don't pay a guy who's supposed to be on your third to fourth line for 7 years.
Absolutely.
Those guys come and go. Look at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh does the same thing every year. They have their top 6. After that, they get who they can. Yeah, they get guys that they prefer because they actually do work in scouting, but they get guys that are cheap and do a good job. And when it's time to move on, they move on. Chris Kunitz is one.
That's why the Penguins are the Stanley Cup champions back-to-back, by the way. Continue.
Right. Because they identify value and they identify talent, and they don't mix them together. Because value sometimes does not mean talent. Sometimes value means, well, I could get this guy for $3 million, but we got this kid in the minors that we can bring up and pay him $500,000, which means I can spend more on something that I need now. That's the kind of stuff that you do as a general manager. And for all the things that Ray Shero did, which were amazing, Jim Rutherford has come in and done even better. So it goes back to identifying guys at a younger age who can get you what you need. And then if it comes time to pay them, great, pay them because you have to reward them. Or if you can find a cheaper alternative, you turn them loose. Right now, there isn't a guy that is available to be signed that is going to be able to net them the same type of performance that Tomas Tatar is, given them the last 3 years. And it's proven because it's all over. So for all the advanced metrics and all these stats that you can make up about guys being even, the one that you got to look at is scoring. And he is the third best scorer. And it's going to sound kind of a goofy stat. He is the third best scorer that is not on an entry-level contract, which means that he is due for a raise or he is due for a long-term contract. And he's going to get one. It just probably won't be with Detroit. And then, again, the beat eunuchs will spin it and say that Tomas Tatar, we'll get to hear about all the things that he bitched about to the coaching staff and how he didn't like doing this or how he didn't like doing that or he didn't want to do this when Blashill told. the same shit will come through. It'll be the same character assassination they've done on Peter Mrazek, the same stuff that they do to every player that's struggling or has rumors of being moved. They assassinate them in the local media so that the dumbass lapdog fans that go there and think that Ken Holland's God get behind him and think, oh yeah, we gotta get rid of this guy because, he didn't listen to the coaches. Well, good luck with finding another 30-goal scorer that plays for relatively cheap the first 6 years of his career.
And how in the devil can the fans and the media tell that the players didn't even listen to the coaches, for Christ's sake? They're just trying to play their hearts out. They're trying to prove to them why they're valuable contributors to this franchise. They're the future of this team. Now they're the now of the team. Athanasiou and Mantha and Dylan Larkin.
Well, and that's when I talk about the not listening to the coaches, that stems from some of the articles that were written about Peter Mrazek when he was exposed in the expansion draft. Because amazingly enough, now that he was exposed or going to be exposed in the expansion draft, he had trouble with goalie coaches and he didn't want to practice or he didn't want to do this stuff. Where was that shit when it actually was happening? Oh, that's right, you didn't say anything about it. How convenient that it comes to light when he's exposed in the expansion draft. If you want him to get fucking picked, maybe you might want to keep that under wraps. But see, that's the kind of bass-backwards management style that Ken Holland profligates. He tells the media that he has bought and paid for it, that, hey, this is the way we're going to go, or this player was doing this, and they print it. They don't care. They're shills. And the Tigers and the Red Wings have really done a very good job of insulating themselves from anybody that's going to question them on what they're doing or why they're doing it. And as a result, we have to do digging by ourselves or go to social media where people provide content that they're able to provide and counter what the beat writers are putting out there to taint the minds of the simple fools that say that they're fans of the team. Do I think the Red Wings are doing the right things? No. I've never thought that every move that they've made is right. But for them to come out and say, well, this is the right move because, and then put a bunch of reasons out there that nobody's ever heard of, I mean, you can't tell me that stuff isn't made to order. It just is. And that's the kind of crap that we get with the Tigers and Red Wings because the Ilitch family doesn't let beat writers into their domain, or anybody for that matter, is going to write negative things about them.
Well, they're just thin-skinned people. And one more thing I wanted to bring up on the Red Wings, and
the second too.
This is kind of echoing what Jeff Moss said on his most recent Periscope about how George Malik, who writes for Kukla's Corner, blogger, who I've really grown less and less fond of. He said that the one hill he's willing to die on is the fact that the Red Wings did the right thing by in the 2016 by taking Dennis Cholowski instead of Jacob Chikrin.
Shut up, you
which,
idiot.
to me, if any fan thinks that, they're full of shit.
Yeah.
Because Chikrin because Chikrin put up 21 points in the fucking NHL. Cholowski only put up 9
for a bad team.
in college. And they go and sign him to an entry-level contract just because he wasn't playing well in college and wasn't making it. And they're trying to say, oh, he was taking a full workload of classes. Look.
Which is why he doesn't deserve to be playing hockey in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand that the guy was trying to get an education.
That's the main question. Do you want to play hockey? The question to Dennis Cholowski right now, do you want to play hockey or do you want to attend classes at college? Make your choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, there are guys who have tried to go into college, get their degree, and play hockey. I mean, if you're able to balance that out, then my hat's off to you, because that's tough to do. I have friends who have gone and played sports in college that didn't manage to get their degree. But again, not everybody can do it. The thing with Cholowski is he's better off just us going somewhere where he can just play. And if he wanted to get his degree so bad, just say, you know what, I need to get my degree to help me in life, get a career, and blah, blah, blah. And now he's going to be hidden in the WHL, which I'm not sure how big of a shit show that's going to be, for all that matters.
Well,
because in fact, I say that the conference there, I think was it St. Cloud State? I don't think they're that. I forget what college.
Very small college.
They're in the NCHC, so
yeah, I don't really think that's that's
not very good.
Tougher than the WHL, because the WHL is considered to be the second best of the CHL leagues, because the O is considered the best, then the Dub, and then the Q.
Right.
So I don't think he's going to look too good there.
Well, and if you really follow junior hockey, which I will on occasion, but the Western Hockey League is traditionally your most physical, your most grueling type of league, simply because of the style of play that many of those teams have embraced. And the Western Hockey League, for a guy who couldn't cut it in college, probably isn't the best place to stick somebody who is, by his own admission, not a physical skater. I mean, Dennis Cholowski is an open ice, fast pace type of player, and the WHL is not that type of league. If he was playing in the OHL, I'd probably be more excited for his development, simply because of the way that league views the playing styles of various teams. But for him to play in the Western Hockey League, which is traditionally the most physical and rough and tumble type of league that you can get into, I mean, that's just a bad fit. And I think that it's just another nail in the coffin, again, of Ken Holland's mismanagement. They offer him an entry-level contract to get him the hell out of college because they thought they needed to prove something with him instead of having him sit there. After Jake Chikrin, who they should have picked, came out and played as an 18-year-old in the National Hockey League. And as Frank mentioned, had 26 points for a pretty bad Arizona team. Now, is Jacob Chikrin going to win the Norris Trophy in the next 2 or 3 years? No. But he played in the National Hockey League and acquitted himself with some aptitude, which means that he's going to develop further. And Dennis Cholowski right now can't even get on the fucking Griffins roster because he's that bad still. And don't tell me about development or whatever else is going on.
He's not developing at all.
No, he's not. He played for the St. Cloud State team, which had Bob Motzko as their head coach. He was the head coach of the junior team for the United States this year that won the World Juniors. But his team at St. Cloud was not that great. They were under 500. And to be told, I mean, they just weren't. They didn't have a good team. And if you can't stand out on a bad team, how are you going to play on a good team? It doesn't make sense. You don't go from very, very rare is the player that is not standing out on a bad team and goes to a good team and starts to really do well. It doesn't happen very often. And when it does, usually that means the person that was in charge of the bad team doesn't know what the hell they were doing. I'm pretty sure that Bob Motzko, again, the head coach of the World Junior Championship winning United States hockey team, I think he knows what he's doing.
And to top the cherry on the shit Sunday, George Malik looks like a thinner version of WWE's Braun Strowman, if you know what I mean, with that beard.
And
looks ridiculous.
And he tries to set up a GoFundMe so he can go up to Traverse City. Really? I mean, can't you go talk to your boy Dan Milstein to help you out, who you write for, you dipshit?
Yeah, and Doesn't Dan Milsey have a client up there that needs some tire pumping? That you could give him the $50 or whatever. I mean, I'm not one to make fun of people's financial status, but when you're doing that kind of stuff, it's hard to be taken seriously. Because when you're saying, well, I cover the team. Well, if you cover the team, there's a difference between covering it from secondhand accounts and there's covering it from actually being there. So I get where sometimes that can be a challenge if it's not your overall job, but for him to put out a GoFundMe so that he can go cover the team that he writes about on a consistent basis, I mean, it really lowers the credibility, regardless of his situation, whatever it might be. It's hard to take somebody like that seriously because you're looking at him and saying, well, how much do you really know about the team? How much are people actually trusting you with any sort of information? Because if you can't go up there by yourself, or at least can't hitch a ride with somebody that's going up there, maybe there's something else going on. And I think that it's hilarious that in his latest article, he's talking about guys that they were picking, and I know that Jeff mentioned this, Casper Cockensalo, who was a third-round pick that the Wings ended up getting in that Chikrin deal along with trading Datsuk. Great. I'm sorry, it was the third-round pick that the Wings got for trading Vanek. What does that matter? That's a pick that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you traded your dead cap space so that you could pick later in the draft instead of picking a defenseman who was at any metric NHL ready at 18. And I think it's funny that it's a hill worth dying on for him, because I've had conversations with him on Twitter before about Cholowski, and every time you bring up something that remotely shows that he's not the player that anybody outside of the Red Wings organization thought he was, it gets shut down. So it tells me right now that he writes with his heart a lot more than he does with his head.
Yeah, it's mind over matter. For us, it's matter over mind for those shills, and including George Malik. Just hanging on to this Red Wings organization like he doesn't give two shits. Just another example of an ineptitude, just like the Lions, which we'll get to later on.
Well, at least they have people that will cover the team that at least tell the damn truth.
Us, for the most part, and Jeff Moss, and Justin Spiro, and Ryan Schuling. We seek the truth from whoever is actually accurate at any time. That's its main purpose. So, speaking of the Red Wings, they've still been in contact with free agent left winger Thomas Vanek. They're trying to get him back. So, any thoughts on that?
I don't think nobody's chance in hell they're going to be able to. I mean, because they're going to have to pay Tatar big bucks this year from arbitration. And plus you got to pay half an CU, and even after you put Cronwall and Franzen on LTIR, there's no way you're going to have any space to sign anybody unless they come to their senses and decide to buy out Jonathan Erickson in the second buyout window, which I think we all can agree that there's a better chance of me winning the Powerball lottery than that happening.
And I think it's also hilarious when we talk about people that write about this team or that cover this team, use that term loosely. They're talking about picking up Vanek, so another cheap one-year deal, so they can trade him again for another piece. Who the hell is going to trade? Nobody wants him. What are you going to get for him? They barely got a third-round pick from Florida this year, or this past season, and now they're going to pick up Vanek again, and he's going to magically... I mean, that's the kind of idiocy that you just get from people that cover the team. Thomas Vanek, yeah, he's a nice player. He's really one-dimensional. He does one thing, and that's fine.
At scoring, too.
Great. When you're in the playoffs, there's other shit you got to do. And it's pretty telling to me that
playing defense.
Thomas Vanek down the stretch actually got scratched a couple of times when he played for the Panthers because, well, hell, you got to play defense too. And it's just amazing the short-sightedness of these people that they think that Thomas Vanek's going to come back to Detroit, number one. Number two, he's going to match the production that he had last year with probably a worse surrounding cast. And number three, the team's going to be dumb enough to give him a better asset than Florida gave them last year, which was a third-round pick. At best, that's what they're going to get. So you're saying that you're going to spend roughly $1.5 million, let's just say, for another third-round pick? Wouldn't it be easier just to trade somebody who hasn't played yet to do that? That's the kind of shit that makes me just despise most of the people that cover this team. Why would you pay that money just to get a third-round pick? It doesn't get you any closer. You can just trade somebody that is on your roster right now for a third-round pick.
Yeah. They either have no room for Thomas Vanek or no room for Tatar. That's what it's going to come down to in terms of that final spot for not the youngsters, but now veterans. Tomas Tatar is still young, but he's already he's almost a veteran, but he's shown that he can score. Thomas Vanek still can score. Which do you get? That's one question. We're not going to have a 5-question segment this week on this episode, but which goal scorer are you going to take if you're the Red Wings? Tomas Tatar or Thomas Vanek? Make up your mind.
Well, I think it's insulting to think that Tomas Tatar is going to be able to be replaced by Vanek at any level, simply because the age difference, the price difference. I mean, there's so many different things. And I agree that Tomas Tatar has his flaws, but I mean, you're basically saying that you're going to go with and again, back to the old Red Wings way, an established player, because you already know what he can do. And Ken Holland's fear of the unknown will jump up and bite him in the ass again, because I can tell you right now that if they get a 1-year deal in arbitration, it's going to weigh heavily on their cap room, regardless of the fact that they can't sign him to a long-term contract. So they're still going to have to pay Athanasiou, which they can't yet. And they still have to pay Xavier Ouellette, which they can't yet because they don't know how much money they have. And so those guys are basically just hanging on, waiting around for people to have things fall in the way that they need to fall before they know how much money they're going to get. And how pissed would you be if you're after Athanasiou and Xavier Ouellette seeing articles about Thomas Vanek when you don't even know what the hell you're going to get?
Well, Buck, I believe Ouellette did get signed to a 2-year bridge deal within the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, he got the 1.25 AAV deal. That did happen a little bit farther back, but still, I mean, he didn't know what it was going to happen with him. He didn't until they said, "Okay, well, this is what this is what we know we can give you." I mean, really, it's got to be somewhat insulting as well, because you're like, well, we don't know exactly how much we can give you, so here's this deal because we know we're going to be able to afford that. Well, thanks. That helps. I mean, it's just the kind of stuff that if you're a player that you're just thinking of, you're looking at it and going, what am I doing here? And it makes people not want to go there. And we talked about this before, that Detroit, which had been the haven for free agents for many a year, is now pretty much the last stop on that bus line. And that's pretty sad.
Yeah, those are two subjects all in one, connected to each other. We connected the dots together between Tomas Tatar and Thomas Vanek, Xavier Ouellette, 2-year, $2.5 million, 1.25 AAV, like Vajcner pointed out. And that's all the material that we've covered for the Red Wings in this episode. Now we transition to basketball and the Pistons.
Left sideline 3 and he answers. Left sideline 3 and he answers.
Well, not much has happened.
Except a couple of things here. They traded Marcus Morris to the Celtics for Avery Bradley, and they filled in for Marcus Morris by signing small forward Anthony Tolliver, or returning Anthony Tolliver to a 1-year, $3.3 million deal. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, right at the very end of my last special report edition on Blog Talk Radio, signed a 1-year, $18 million contract with the Los Angeles Lakers. So there goes KCP. He's no longer a Piston. He's a Los Angeles Laker now. Also, the Pistons have talked a possible Reggie Jackson trade, sending him to the New Orleans Pelicans for Etuan Moore and Alexis Ajinka. So let's start off with the Marcus Morris trade for Avery Bradley. What say you? I think it's a good trade. Avery Bradley is a shooting guard that can hit threes. That Anthony Tolliver, still another 3-point shooter.
Well, with the trade for Avery Bradley, I mean, I'm gonna echo a lot what Justin Spiro said on his podcast, is that it's gonna do good in the short term, because it makes the Pistons a better basketball team, because obviously Avery Bradley is a great 3-point shooter, and he can defend very well. Mm-hmm. Well, he's an upgrade over KCP. But if your goal is to win a championship, it's really hurts you in the long term, because you've only got Bradley for a year, because he's going to be an unrestricted free agent, and he's probably going to come in and a max deal. And plus, you've already got a lot of money tied up in Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson. So, I mean,
unless they trade Reggie Jackson away, hopefully.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's great for the short term, because I think the Pistons will end up possibly winning anywhere from I win 49, 50 games next year. Here be real solid in the regular season, but I just don't think it's going to help them in the long term, because as Herman, I think also you mentioned them mentioned that rumored trade that Reggie Jackson was getting sent to the Pelicans for Etuan Moore, and one dude whose name I can't say without butchering. I mean, they're going to have to possibly do. That's a deal they're going to have to do. But are you really going to want to have Etuan Moore as your starting point guard?
Well, it'll have to. The shooting guard is going to come down to either him or the other guy that the Pistons have. They have point guard Ish Smith, of course.
Ish Smith is Ish Smith is a solid backup, but he's not starting caliber point guard.
No, you gotta keep him as a bench player, for at least for now. But KCP to Los Angeles Lakers, it had to happen. The KCP's departure just had to happen. No questions asked. But Buck, what say you on this Avery Bradley trade and KCP's departure? Not very much, huh? Anyway, the NBA regular season opens October 17th. The trade deadline is now moved up to February 8th, 2018, and the Board of Governors have voted to reduce maximum timeouts per game from 18 to 14, which is a little bit more challenging. I would think that the coaches from here forward would have to save even more of their timeouts from more of their first few timeouts during the middle of the game or the beginning or the middle of the game, you name it, or try to reduce them during the earlier stages of the game and save them for the later portions of the game. Well, especially the first quarter, you don't really call too many timeouts. Well, you shouldn't.
Yeah, unless the other team is just coming out guns a-blazing thing. But again, I mean, even on the college scene, they reduced the number of timeouts per game from 5 to 4, or just to kind of help the pace of the game move along. But I will say, I do like the fact that they're starting the NBA regular season much earlier in October, because that way you don't have as many back-to-back games. Because when you're on the road and having to go from one city to another, that gets to be a pain in the ass. Because you're going, let's say if you're on a West Coast trip, you go and one night you're playing in Portland, and then the next night you go and play in Sacramento. I mean, it helps that you have less of those nights. Or if the Pistons are playing at home one night, next night they got to go to Philadelphia. You'll still have a couple of back-to-backs there, just because that you need a couple of them just so you can get all your games fit in the time frame. But don't have so many of them. At least players will get a chance to catch their breath and after a tough game one night. And I think also this will possibly reduce having to sit out due to rest, because I know that was something talked about last year when it was Saturday night games on ABC, and if the Cavs were playing, then they find out that LeBron and Kyrie were being rested, or if the Warriors were playing, that Steph Curry was being rested, or if the Spurs were playing, then they were resting some of their guys, this, that, and the other. But starting the season earlier, that's a move I like. As for the trade deadline, having it before the All-Star break, it's an interesting move, but I would say it's probably to prevent a deal that happened during last year's All-Star game where the Kings ended up sending Boogie Cousins to the Pelicans. So you can't have any more of that, but I'd like how it works this year, how it plays out, just so I can really evaluate it any further.
The back-to-backs, you also get 3 and 4s. And 3 games in 4 nights, there's a lot of times where you're seeing teams that are at the tail end of a 3 and 4, and you might also have a team coming off a back-to-back, and that's just terrible basketball. And so I think it's going to be good for a lot of teams to get that schedule spread out. It also allows the arenas a little bit more flexibility, so they're not jamming games into specified slots because they have other things that need to make those arenas money other than the NBA. So I think it's going to be a win for that. As far as the trade deadline, I really don't think that moving it behind the All-Star game is going to make much of a difference. All it's going to do is really make teams decide at a sooner time if they are going to be buyers or sellers, if they're really going to make a stretch run or not. I think it'll be interesting because you'll have guys that are getting traded on teams for longer, which will allow them to build a little bit more chemistry. But truth be told, with all the teams, the super teams really at the top of the league right now, teams that are making trades probably aren't going to be getting any better than those teams like the Clevelands, the Bostons, the Golden States, the Houstons of the world. And so it probably just is something so the NBA can really kind of market that as their own. There won't be anything else going on around that time typically. And so it allows them to make that trade deadline kind of their own thing. And also give some teams a little bit more time to grow chemistry-wise with their new additions.
Absolutely. So I think that's all the Pistons talk we've covered. Now let's transition to the Lions.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
First and foremost, Calvin Johnson admits he retired due to the Lions' lowest and awful chances at winning the Super Bowl. Not only did he retire due to health issues, he just like Barry Sanders, he got tired of losing. He got tired of playing for the historically worst franchise in sports history. He got tired of the Lions missing the playoffs like most years. He's tired of not winning a playoff game since 1991. He's learned the fact that the Lions have won just one playoff game in 1991 since 1957, when they last won their NFL championship, and they never won a Super Bowl too,
or even played in one.
Right? He's never even played in a Super Bowl game.
Yeah, didn't even get past the wild card round.
Right. And even though there were a few blown calls by the referees, that's just adversity that the Lions refuse to overcome. They just base their emotions on the referees just quote unquote screwing them on and off. But the Lions, they have to play a lot better. They have to stop being the inept franchise that they always were since their last NFL championship. They have to stop complaining about the referees. They have to stop making excuses. They have to put up or shut up. They got a better offensive line. They got a buffed up defensive line. They got TJ Lang, especially protecting Matthew Stafford.
Well, and that's a theme that every Lions fan has heard before. Oh, they got this new thing, and they got that new thing, and they did this, they did that. It's going to boil down to, again, performance on the field. And you can get all you want in a free agency. You can make all the trades and signing that you want, but it's going to come down to performance. And I also find it hilarious that there's some indignation amongst Lions fans that Calvin Johnson would make those comments, especially the trash column that Mitch Albom published today in Detroit's Free Press. He said what he thought was the truth, and he spoke from his heart. I don't care how much you're getting paid. I don't care how much you do or don't care about the game. If you're playing for a losing team and it's a consistent battle just to be relevant in the NFL circle, it's going to wear on you. And I think for Calvin Johnson to make those comments, all he was doing was saying what his feelings were. Yes, he retired because his body was beat up. Yes, he retired because he felt like he didn't have the same passion for the game anymore. And you know why the reason for that was? Because his team stunk. And he probably could have played through some of those things had he been on the Patriots or had he been on a good team. But he wasn't. And so it makes it that much easier to say, you know what, I'm kind of done here. I want to be a functioning adult when I grow older. I don't want to be in a wheelchair or not able to get up and move or eating out of a straw the rest of my life. So I'm going to quit. My body's beat up, and it's not getting me anywhere because I'm not getting to the highest level that I possibly can with the team that I'm currently on. Plus the fact that the Lions were not going to trade him. They were not going to let him out of the contract. So really the only escape that he had was retirement. So I don't blame Calvin Johnson one bit for saying what he felt. Do I think it's completely right? Well, that's for another time. I don't think that he needs to sit there and coddle the fans that he no longer has to deal with because he came out and spoke the truth. He didn't want to play for him anymore because He wasn't really into the game. He was beat up. And the fact that, hey, we are not winning, and it's no fun to play for a losing team. So I think that Calvin Johnson was more than within his rights to be able to say that kind of stuff. And I think that the reaction from some of the Lions fans that I've heard over the last couple of days is hilarious. Number one, because I'm not a Lions fan, but number two, because they expect Calvin Johnson to come out and talk all these rainbows and gumdrops about the franchise that he retired from, when all he did was tell him the God's honest truth that the losing wore on him and was a factor in his retirement. He didn't say, I think the Lions are losers and I never want to be associated with that franchise again.
Right.
I could see some vitriol, but he basically told them the truth. He said,
yep.
I was beat up, my body was starting to decline, and the losing was certainly wearing on me. Again, is it easier to play when you're winning championships? I'm sure Tom Brady gets up some days and goes, Jesus, I wish I could just not have to do this after he plays a tough game. But you know what? He gets to win, or at least have a chance at winning at the end of the day. So that probably carries him through a couple of those tough days. Calvin Johnson didn't have that. And I don't care what anybody says. If you're a professional athlete, you can sit there and count the money any way you want to. If you got to get up and get your brains beat in every week and don't have a chance of getting that brass ring, it's going to wear on you. And it wore on somebody like Calvin Johnson. He decided to retire. So for all the Lions fans or just outside commenters that say that Calvin Johnson's a fraud, that he doesn't have his heart on the game, they can go screw themselves. Because I would love it for them to take a job where they made good money but had no chance of advancement and really had no chance of doing anything else with their life, and see how long that they could go on that. Because everybody that says, well, I could make $20 million a year, yeah, I'm sure you could, but you're not a professional football player. And I think it speaks more to Calvin Johnson from walking away from some money. That tells me the degree of dissatisfaction and also introspection he had in his career to walk away from some money and just become a spectator rather than play another year for the franchise that he knew didn't have a chance of going.
I agree with you 100% on that, Buck. I mean, nobody should have to like being a loser. So if he was tired of it, then okay. I mean, people will want to rip him and for saying that because, again, they expect him to just bring out the rainbows and sunshine and unicorns and all that bullshit.
Yeah, there's none of that in that franchise, period, unless you earn a championship, for God's sake.
And they didn't do that.
Nope.
I mean, I think he was fully within his right to say it.
Right.
Nobody, you don't. I mean, nobody should be satisfied with playing for a losing team, and he wasn't. So, I mean, if it was me that saw Calvin and he said that, I just would have said, "Let me be the first to shake your hand." Being honest.
I mean, all he did was say the truth.
Yeah.
That's all he did. He didn't come out and say, the Lions are a terrible franchise, I hate them, I wish they would die in a fire. He didn't say that.
No, he's more professional than that.
Yeah, but that's the kind of stuff that you like, I mean, it's the kind of stuff that burns bridges. He basically just said, I don't like losing. And that was a factor in my retirement. That's what you boil that statement down to. And all these people that are making this big issue out of it, again, go get your fingers busted up, go get your ankle turned into a stick, go get your head smashed in, and then not have any reward at the end of it. It's those people it's the same dopes that will say, I could take a punch from Floyd Mayweather for $5 million.
Any slapdick would say that.
Right. I mean, do you like eating out of a straw for like 6 months? Because that's pretty much what's going to happen. I mean, like him or not, you're probably not going to feel that good after it. So that's the kind of logic that people want to use. Is like, well, I could make $20 million. No, you could, because it sucks. It sucks being a successful professional football player. Look at all the guys that played that are old now. I mean, guys that I grew up watching and now struggle to get out of bed, struggle to remember their own damn name. And they were successful. So tell me how much it was worth to them to make it through those type of pains and those type of situations so they could grab that brass ring or at least have a chance at it. And now you have people criticizing Calvin Johnson because he doesn't want to be like that because he didn't have a future. Again,
they're a bunch of punks.
If he was playing for a team that was any good, do you think maybe he can get up in the morning and say, well, this is going to suck today, but I'm going to have a chance at a championship, so I'm going to make it work. That happens on a daily basis. Ask any professional athlete. If you're on a team that sucks, it is that much harder to get out of bed. I don't care what you're being paid.
Right.
So for people to jump on Calvin Johnson and say that he's a traitor and all this other stuff, screw off. Because, again, he's saying the truth. People might not like to hear it, but he just told you the truth. And that's okay. And for people to say, well, he said he quit because of injuries. Yep, he did.
That's one
He
thing.
did quit because he doesn't. That's one thing. Those injuries or those physical limitations were also offset with the fact that he wasn't getting anything out of it. He was being compensated very well. And I'm sure he's very thankful and blessed. But that doesn't mean he wanted to get out of bed and beat his head against the wall for a 7-9 football team every year. And that's the part that weighs heavily on him. And so as a competitor, after a while, it's finally going to break him down. With all the other things, it just made him say, you know what, I'm done. I had a good career. I'm probably going to make the Hall of Fame, regardless if I win a championship or not. So screw it, I'm done.
And there was another former Lion that actually backed him up. You know who that is? Dan Orlovsky, of all people. Dan Orlovsky was backing Calvin Johnson's opinions about his retirement. I know people find that hard to believe because considering Dan Orlovsky was the guy that walked into the back of the end zone back in 2008, but he was actually a man of his word. He grew up.
Dan Orlovsky,
he grew a set.
Well, and the thing for Dan Orlovsky is he hasn't been on a lot of good football teams either. But the thing is for Dan Orlovsky, he knows he's been a teammate of Calvin Johnson's for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Saved that time in Indianapolis. So he knows the deal. And Dan Orlovsky has played on a lot of bad football teams. You know why he continues to play on a lot of bad football teams? Because he's the backup. He doesn't have to take the day in, day out beating unless somebody goes down. So, yeah, football's a nasty game, but for Dan Orlovsky, he even knows the score because he's been there and he's played on some bad teams, and he knows how hard it is to prepare when you're 3-7 and you know that your season's in the toilet. You got 6 more games to go. You know how hard it is to prepare for those games. You know what the deal is, and that's just the mental side of it. Then the physical side, going out every week and just getting your face beat in, regardless of how good you are, that wears on you. And I just think, again, like I said, I just think that people are looking for some reason to vilify Calvin Johnson to somehow validate what the current Lions team is doing, which is losing 4 straight down the stretch and proving again that they're an inept franchise. So if people want to jump into that bandwagon and really dismiss Calvin Johnson the same way they dismissed Barry Sanders when he retired, all for it. That's another part of the fan base that I don't need to talk with, even though I'm not a Lions fan. At least I can have a intelligent conversation about that franchise. And if you're that type of fan, then go somewhere else because I don't need to talk to you about football.
Yeah, I'm with you, Buck. I mean, I myself am a Lions fan, but if anyone wants to vilify Calvin Johnson, then they can go kick rocks.
Yeah, or kick garbage cans, for that matter. They need to start growing sets of balls and having some dignity, for Christ's sake. Go back to school or something. Go back to college. We don't give 2 shits. learn the Lions' history first before you even start getting all judgmental. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Lions fans. We all three of us are talking to you. We hate to lay it out there like this, but that's the way it is. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. There's no way at all to sugarcoat it. That's just the reality.
And I'll use my experience. I mean, I'm a Bears fan, so I look at a guy like Jay Cutler, right? Now, Jay Cutler had his foibles. He was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. He's not the same type of stratosphere that Calvin Johnson was. Jay Cutler retired. Why? Because the Bears told him they didn't want him, and no other teams really wanted him. And you know what? He was okay with that. You know why? Because he had his chance. Shit, he made it to an NFC Championship game farther than Calvin Johnson ever made it. So Jay Cutler, who, for all his attitude and all these other things that went on when he was in the league, people aren't even jumping on him for basically retiring and walking away from possible offers. They're more mad at Calvin Johnson than they are at Jay Cutler. That has to tell you something about the fan bases right there. Because nobody's mad at Jay Cutler for basically saying, you know, I just don't want to play football anymore. I'm good. I don't need to chase the dream, because I'm sure that he could have worked out for a team and gotten a lower level contract and been the backup and made money. But he decided not to. He just said, to hell with that. I'm good. I'm done with football. And Jay Cutler, who is not even close to the same player that Calvin Johnson was, takes less heat for doing something like that.
Man.
And you know the fact that Jay Cutler did not play on some pretty bad football teams. Same as Calvin Johnson. Not as bad as Calvin Johnson, but pretty close. And you know they had to wear on Jay Cutler as well. There's a lot of other factors, but it boils down to somebody that was not liked in his time in the league and was widely panned, faces less criticism than a guy that's going to go to the Hall of Fame. That tells me right there what you're dealing with as a fan base. In a majority, not everybody, but in an overwhelming majority.
Imagine a quarterback like Jay Cutler playing for a team not named the Detroit Lions, being a thin-skinned pussy, in other words. I mean, that is just out of this world, man.
It makes no sense. I mean, you'd think that those people would be more upset that people would be more upset with him walking away from the game because nobody would care. But you bring those two situations together, and it's just mind-boggling that the national media, and especially the Chicago media that had to deal with him, basically said, you know what, we're all good here. There were some things you did that we didn't like, and I'm sure that we did some things that you didn't like, but you got cut, and he didn't try to chase the dream and take any contract offers. He said, just to hell with them, just going to walk away from the game of football, from playing football. And he's taking less flack than Calvin Johnson, who basically just said, I didn't like losing, plus it sucked losing, and that was a decision, that was part of my decision to retire. I mean, I just don't know how Lions fans that are criticizing him can look at that and say, how is that possible? How am I going to criticize a guy for walking away when he did everything he could more to bring a championship to Detroit, and he was simply just tired and fed up with the way it was going?
Because most Lions fans are from Detroit, and Detroit is a city full of arrogant, brash, wrong-doing people, uncaring, who makes this town like almost a war zone. Like like hell on earth, Fallujah, a nightmare, just topsy-turvy. A lot of people in Detroit like do drugs, drink too much beer, smoke too many cigarettes, drink a lot of Kool-Aid on top of everything. I mean, that's just typical. It's all that shit has been happening for years. Not just with the Detroit teams, but the people in Detroit, all over the greater Detroit area, for many years. It's becoming numb to me. It's becoming numb to us. But speaking of former Lions, former Detroit Lions linebacker Chris Spielman has sued the Ohio State University over likeness. He filed the antitrust lawsuit, according to the Detroit Free Press, in federal court in Columbus on behalf of current and former Ohio State football players. This is from the Associated Press. The complaint targets Ohio State marketing programs and contracts that promote the university using likenesses of athletes, including a Honda-sponsored program of 64 banners hung around Ohio Stadium, home of the Buckeyes, the Horseshoe, featuring photos of former players. In addition to Spielman, some of the other Ohio State greats whose pictures appear on those banners, including running back Archie Griffin, who won the Heisman Trophy in 1974 and 1975, lineman Jim Stillwagon, who played on the 1968 National Championship team, and Mike Doss, a safety who played on the 2002 National Championship team. All are among the athletes Spielman is suing on behalf of, said Brian Duncan, a Columbus attorney who represents Spielman. The lawsuit names Ohio State and talent management giant IMG as defendants and names Honda and Nike as co-conspirators. Nike is targeted for its Legends of the Scarlet and Gray vintage jersey licensing program, and other apparel contracts with Ohio State, the Buckeyes. The lawsuit accuses the university and the companies of, quote, unjust and monopolistic behaviors, unquote, and asks for compensation above $75,000, as is typical in such complaints, while noting Ohio State makes millions in revenue from merchandising programs involving ex-athletes. The lawsuit said, quote, former OSU student-athletes do not share in these revenues, even though they have never given informed consent to the widespread and continued commercial exploitation of their images, unquote. An Ohio State spokesman said he was looking into the matter. Messages seeking comment were left with New York-based IMG, Tokyo-based Honda Motor Company, and Beaverton, Oregon-based Nike Incorporated. Spielman sued in his own right and on behalf of a newly formed company, Profectus Group Incorporated, created by ex-Ohio State wrestling standout Mike Dispato, representing former college athletes. Griffin is also affiliated with the company, Duncan said. The filing comes after 8 months of unsuccessful negotiations with the university, said Duncan. Spielman told the Associated Press in a statement he will donate any money obtained through the lawsuit directly to the university's athletic department. Spielman said, quote, my concern is about the exploitation of all former players across this nation who do not have the platform to stand up for themselves, while universities and corporations benefit financially by selling their name and likenesses without their individual consent, unquote. Griffin told the AP he fully supports the rights of former athletes to receive compensation from corporations and universities that benefit from the unauthorized use of players' names and likenesses. He plans to donate his proceeds to a non-profit affiliate with the Profectus Group, which will serve which will serve as a player's assistant fund for ex-Ohio State athletes in need. The lawsuit is the latest development in a trend of athletes fighting for compensations they say they're owed as a result of their participation in intercollegiate sports. Earlier this year, the NCAA and 11 major athletic conferences announced they agreed to pay $208.7 million to settle a federal class action lawsuit. A federal class action lawsuit filed by former college athletes who claimed the value of their scholarships was illegally capped. Last year, the U.S. Supreme Court left in place lower court rulings that said the NCAA's use of names, images, and likenesses of college athletes without compensation violated antitrust law. The lawsuit was originally brought by former UCLA basketball star Ed O'Bannon and later joined by other athletes. After that ruling, athletic departments should know better than to undertake the kind of licensing arrangements with former athletes that Spielman is targeting in his lawsuit, said John Grady, a University of South Carolina professor of sport law. Grady said Friday, quote, "You cannot use someone's image from however many years ago without compensation given O'Bannon," unquote. So that's the end of that article. So who do you think wins this case? Frank, I'll start with you.
I would have to say that Chris Spielman probably wins it because this kind of goes back to, because I believe it was Ed O'Bannon who was part of filing the lawsuit to prohibit EA Sports from making NCAA football and NCAA basketball because they were using their likenesses in those games. Now, personally, I think all this stuff is just a bunch of bullshit. And all that and the other because it's taken away a good product. But at the end of the day, if they're going to get that stopped and realize that guys need to get paid for their likenesses, I think Spielman will end up winning this, whether it's decided in a court or if they end up settling out of court.
Well, he could actually not only get a settlement out of court, but he also could win the case because Nike and Honda have not been listed as defendants, so he can actually be compensated or reach a settlement with them separately from the university and IMG. So I think this is going to be interesting because I don't think Nike and Honda want to have to do anything with a court case. So I'm sure that they'll probably scratch a check to Chris Spielman, and who will then in turn donate it and either put it into the ex-Ohio State Athlete Emergency Assistance Fund or whatever it was that he's going to donate it to. And then he can still pursue the court case with the university and IMG because his likeness, along with many others, was used without consent or compensation. And it goes back to the age-old argument of, does the college own your rights as a private citizen to be compensated for your performance in the name of the school? And it's always a very sticky situation. And it goes back to even compensating players, because if you're going to say, all right, I'm going to pay, let's just take, and I'll use somebody from current day sports for college. We'll go to Michigan, okay? Let's say somebody wants to pay Rashawn Gary, who is a higher profile player on Michigan's team. They want to pay Rashawn Gary to advertise or to do something that would bring attention to their product. Say they want to give him money to say, hey, this product is the best, or whatever. Now, if I'm Michigan, if I'm the university, I'm saying, no, wait a minute. He doesn't get this money if we don't have him on our team because he's a member of a high-profile football program. And we should be getting a part of that pie, or most of it, because number one, he's an amateur athlete. Number two, to get that notoriety without being on our campus. And it's a very sticky situation because both sides are relatively in the right. Ohio State isn't selling ad space or using likenesses of players just because it suits them. They're using them because at the time that those guys were part of the school, they're not employees of the school, but they were benefactors of scholarships and facilities and everything else. So it becomes a really interesting tug of war. I think that Chris Spielman is correct. I think that once they've left the school, you've got to at least get their permission. I mean, Chris Spielman probably, because he's such a stand-up guy, probably would have said, yeah, just take the money that you're going to give me and put it into a scholarship fund or do whatever. I don't care. I got enough money. I got enough whatever. Okay? But that's up to him to make because it is his likeness. It is his choice. So I think that I think they're going to find him in the right. And what that's going to force universities and colleges to do is it's going to force them to basically reassess how they look at how they treat alumni with respect to promoting their current product. Because now if I'm an alumnus of a school, I'm going to say, hey, and I'll use Michigan just because I'm a Michigan fan. It's easier for me to think of guys off the top of my head. But, and if I'm, we'll use anybody from, Charles Woodson. If every time they show Charles Woodson in a Nike jersey, because now Michigan is a Jumpman school, which is a division of Nike somewhat, does Charles Woodson say, hey, where's my check? Because he's got a right to that. So it becomes really difficult for the universities to do that. But I think that it is up to the guys who have graduated because they are no longer tied to the school in that way. That they should be able to decide where that money goes, whether it goes into their own pocket or goes back to the school or goes to wherever. And Chris Spielman makes an excellent point with this lawsuit because the schools have basically hidden those negotiations from the players because they believe that they own those likenesses from the times they were at the university, which once they're done playing for the university, I mean, it's hard to justify the fact that you're going to continue to use those to promote what the product is on the field. So it's a very, like I said, it's a very sticky situation. It's a very difficult case to navigate. But I think that overall, in the end, that Spielman's probably going to come out on top because if I'm the court, I look at what their current status is, not what their previous status was. And if you work for a company and you go somewhere else to work, the former company isn't going to put your face on the billboard because now they got to pay you. And it kind of falls into that vein for me that if I worked for a company and they want to put my face on a billboard even though I work for somebody else, yeah, I'm going to get paid because they don't have any hold over me whatsoever. And I think that's for the colleges and the universities in this country, the same thing happens. Once they're gone, they're gone. And I think it's going to be something that's be a very long and drawn-out court case, but I think it will end up in Spielman's favor. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Chris Spielman has to win that case. We'll stay on top of that. Whenever it pops up again, we will find out who does win the case. So now it's time for everybody to wake up and put your pencils down and get ready for the segment that we call What's Your Grade?
Pencils down, everyone. It's time to find out what's your grade.
Ready when you are.
Yep. I had two on this segment, but I just came up with a third. I'm going to start with that. The team meeting. So, what's your grade, Frank Vajcner?
I'm really not so sure I can give this a grade because for one, guys like Vanek and others are going to say,
hint.
it would help the team, but of course, as a result of the meeting, they didn't go out and completely shit their pants. So, I mean, I honestly can't really give it a grade. I'm going to have to give it an incomplete because
That's an option. I was going to say that.
yeah, because I think it's just because for one, because they didn't go out and completely shit their pants, so I can't go and give them a bad mark for that. But at the same time, I can't go and say that it helped them when it didn't. They were playing a deadbeat Blue Jays team. I mean, if this would have happened against the Yankees or any other team that's at the top for that matter, I'd probably give you a grade. But beating up on a deadbeat team after having a meeting, I'm giving you an incomplete for that one.
Buck, I think you'd come up with the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's on the surface. I mean, I don't think it got a very good grade, even if we were able to. But there's no tangible evidence that it did anything, and so for people to make any sort of conclusion as to the effect of it would be pretty reckless. So I would say incomplete simply because there's no way to really grade something like that without having a longer term sample size. Now, let's say they win 9 out of their next 10. We might be able to revisit that because maybe they can say, well, maybe somebody finally got a fire up their ass and they did something about it. But after the first 2 games, no, it's way too difficult to tell. And we've kind of beaten the Blue Jays up a little bit, but hey, they're not a very good baseball team either, and that's who Detroit beat. You can only play the schedule that's put up in front of you. I understand that, but incomplete's my grade.
So is mine. It's only 3 games after the All-Star break. The Tigers won 2 out of 3, granted, but it doesn't guarantee shit. That's the main point. It's still not nearly enough to save Brad Ausmus's job as manager in particular. Get the fuck out of here, fans. And certainly it's not going to help the Tigers believe that they need to buy. They're already planning to sell, for God's sake. They're putting Justin Verlander, Alex Avila, Justin Wilson, and J.D. Martinez on the fucking market already.
They fielded offers for him.
Yeah.
They may not have gone through with him, but they fielded the offer. They're not going to just turn around and say, screw it, let's buy instead.
When they don't even have shit to buy with.
They didn't. Right. They finished well below 500 at the end of June. They're still 8 games below 500 through here at this point. July 16th.
6 games back.
6 games back.
They would literally have to win pretty much, I would say, every game until the middle of next week for them to even justify not selling.
But there are many, right. There are many teams ahead of the Tigers. Even the Blue Jays, who are not a good team. Like we pointed out, still a half game ahead of the Tigers.
And the Tigers are 6. The Tigers are farther back in the wild card standings than they are in their own division.
Yeah, that's what matters.
And I don't think that and plus, we mentioned that the Tigers are the second worst team in the American League, only ahead of the White Sox. You think anybody who is within striking distance ahead of them is buying? Are the Blue Jays going to buy?
No.
Get the fuck out if you think that's going to happen.
Shit, Baltimore's looking to sell. And they're probably, on paper, a much more talented team than Detroit.
Right. And also look at the bottom teams in the AL West. They're looking to sell.
And it's the same thing, just like when the Red Wings are in the playoff mix. It's, you got to climb over 6 other fucking teams. It's not like you're the only team that's got to play.
It's a National Hockey League. 30-team
well,
NHL.
Sorry. Well, and you got to mention, and I was going to mention this too. The AL West, shit, that's over. So,
yeah,
I mean,
all
that's
4
just
teams are looking to sell. Not name the Houston Astros, for God's sake.
right. I mean,
They're far behind them.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is that the Tigers, you got other teams that are looking to improve themselves. I'm sure that the Cleveland Indians are going to make it through the trade deadline without picking somebody up. I'm sure maybe even the Minnesota Twins are going to look at least at light buy, because as long as they don't have to sacrifice something that they've got coming up through the pipe, they probably look at a chance to get into the playoffs and get their fans excited as a reasonable price to pay. Kansas City is only 2 games out, and they really don't have that great of a team. They could look to buy too, because their farm system is not that bad. So, just in their own division, everybody above them is going to be buying too. And so it's not like they're going to get any worse. Plus the AL East is tight. And then you have the other side, the National League. There's guys that are going to be buying too. The Brewers probably want to try to hold off the Cubs as long as they can, so they're going to be looking to buy. The Cubs are going to be looking to buy. They've already done so. The Braves, right now at 500, maybe they think they can make a wild card push. I mean, you're looking at teams that are potential buyers, and right now, I mean, the division races are, except for the Central, the 2 other divisions, the East and the West, and the the National League, are pretty much foregone conclusions. But there's teams that still have the wild card, and there's a pretty tight race for that. So those are other teams that are going to look to buy. And I just think it's hilarious how Tigers fans or Tigers beat Unix are saying the team should buy because they beat the Blue Jays 2 games. Get out of here.
Yeah, they still have the Kansas City Royals and the Minnesota Twins coming up, and then the Kansas City Royals again at Comerica Park. But first they got to start that 7-game road trip.
I mean, these are the same type of people that were saying the Red Wings should fucking buy in January. I mean, get out of here.
Yeah. Those people are still high on a lot of hallucinations, for God's sake. Like I pointed out, in Detroit and in the greater Detroit area. I mean, there's no other way to explain it.
It's pointless.
Yep. Grade number 2, Tigers general manager Al Avila at least waiting until the trade deadline. I'll go first on this one. I give it at least, at most, a mid-range D, because when you wait until the trade deadline, chances are your farm system is going to run out on you when you're trying to trade for that.
Right.
Unless you trade right now. For example, you missed out on 7 prospects who went to the White Sox for Jose Quintana to the Cubs. That's the tone setter for you.
Well, and I'll jump in too. I mean, my grade on this is also in the range. I would say probably a D+, because if you wait until the deadline, not only do you miss out on potential people that if you were even thinking of buying that you would get to, but the other side is other people are going to move quicker than you. And so if you need to sell, all of a sudden, the people that are waiting until the deadline, now they've already got their players. And then you're stuck with a bag of shit that you already didn't get rid of. It's like a yard sale. You got to go early. You got to get all the good stuff. Because at the end, it's just a random crap fest. And you hope you can find something. Because nobody else wanted it, so now you got to try to get rid of it.
And you're always going to end up with nothing.
Right, and that's the same mentality for Al Avila right now. If you're going to sell, I mean, he's advertised, he's taken offers. Now that doesn't mean he's gotten the ones he's wanted, but now they win 2 games. You can't go to all those teams and say, well, we beat Toronto 2 out of 3, so let's hold off. That's not how that works, because they're going to call another team and say, well, the Tigers didn't really want to talk because they don't know what they're doing right now, so let's talk to you. And then they go get their guy. Washington Nationals struck early. They got a bag of trash, but but they put guys in their bullpen.
2 prospects, to be exact.
Well, and the thing is the Nationals were going to screw around. They got Ryan Madson and Sean Doolittle, who aren't that great, but hey, other teams weren't waiting around, or the other teams were waiting around. The Nationals said, hey, we can get guys now, so let's do it. And they got them probably at a cheaper price than they would closer to the deadline because. So to wait until the trade deadline is really kind of death, unless you really don't know which team or which direction your team is headed. So D+.
Frank?
I'm going to have to give it a D as well because it just seems like the same shit, different year. Just want to keep kicking the can down the road.
Frank, I lost you. But yeah, it's a D. Oh, boy. Buck, are you still there? So,
it does not mean that they're not going to get him back in free agency. It's less likely.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. I lost the both of you.
No, that's okay. I mean, you're talking about guys that if you're trading a pending free agent, that does not mean you cannot re-sign them. It happens more than once. And so other people that are talking about, oh, we can't lose them for nothing. Well, you might be able to get something for him and then sign him again. And I'll use the Cespedes example. Until the Mets just wrote basically a blank check, Cespedes was talking with the Tigers about re-signing. And then they move in a different direction. They end up getting Justin Upton. So that does not mean they can't get him back. It makes it less likely for sure, but it does not just shut the door. So all these people that are saying, well, we got to hold on to him so we can try to re-sign him. No.
You got to do better than that.
Well, you get what you can, and if JD Martinez really loves playing in Detroit, he'll come back if he gets a fair offer. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, Frank. Frank, let's get back to you. I lost you when you were talking, but I didn't get much for you when you cut off. So
well, I just said I give it a D because it's essentially the same old shit that we've seen. Just keep kicking the can down the road. We're gonna wait and decide what we want to do, and next thing you know, it's too late to do anything, and you end up being shit out of luck.
Right. You gotta act way ahead of time.
You gotta be proactive and not reactive.
Right. I'm going to change my grade and give it a D- because there's definitely nothing good. If I were to grade it in E, that would probably be almost the same thing. I'd still give it a D-. At least you traded. At least you were selling. You just didn't come up with the right prospects.
The only reason I'm not failing it is because they actually did field offers. So.
Yep, that's the point. Now that's one point. You got to get better. You just got to get much better prospects than that.
Yeah, and the only reason why I'm not giving them a failing grade is because they've been fielding offers, just haven't had one they've agreed to yet, and plus trade deadline's still a few days away.
Right. So the third thing we want to get to in terms of grading, the Pistons trading Marcus Morris for Avery Bradley, and a result getting back small forward Anthony Tolliver. It's all put into one. What's your grade? Buck, I'll start with you.
Well, last week I graded the Bradley trade a B+. And the additions that they made with Anthony Tolliver
They've also brought back, I think it was Reggie Bullock, they brought back 2 years at $5 million. I really like the way that they've constructed the roster. I think it's probably the best one that Stan Van Gundy has had. And the style of coaching and style of play that he likes, which is predicated upon outside shooting and defense. I mean, he's got it pretty much all in place for him now. And I think by the way that they're making these moves, I think Stan Van Gundy understands this is kind of a make or break year for him, because if they don't make the playoffs, or at least don't show some sort of improvement, because last year was a really bad fall off from what they did in 2015-16. He might not have the head coach title anymore, and could possibly even lose his team president title and just be without a job. So I really feel like Stan Van Gundy was motivated and had a clear plan in the offseason. They weren't going to re-sign KCP unless he came at a bargain price. That didn't happen, and they were happy to let him go after they made the moves for Galloway and then also Avery Bradley. So I feel like this grade right now is still kind of I can't really go too much farther than a B plus, because we don't know how it's all going to work out. But I feel like Stan Van Gundy understood the urgency of the situation, unlike other Detroit front office people, and really attacked and made waves where other general managers probably, or other team presidents probably wouldn't have. So I like the moves, and I really like the roster construction. Now just the Stan Van Gundy, the team president, gets a B plus. I don't know what Stan Van Gundy, the head coach, is going to get, because he has to put all of those all those parts into practice and get them to work for him.
I'm going to give it a B minus, and while I agree that Avery Bradley is an upgrade over KCP, and plus they brought in guys like Anthony Tolliver and brought Reggie Bullock back for fairly cheap. I agree with Buck that the roster construction is pretty good. I'll just go back to what I mentioned earlier, and this is the same thing Justin Spiro said on his Spiro Avenue podcast. It's an illusion of success. I mean, it's going to be great in the short term. The Pistons are going to win a lot of basketball games next year. They could win 50 games, and they could, who knows, maybe get up to fourth in the East. But the thing is, Andre Drummond is still the face of this franchise, and we've gone on and on and on about how he's got too much going on between the ears, and the fact that Bradley is only under contract for one more year, and he's going to command a max deal. So if the Pistons go out and trade Reggie Jackson or somehow, God willing, manage to get rid of Andre Drummond and his contract, then I think they'd be in better shape in the long term. But the short term is going to be great. But the fact that the long term is hurting, that's why I'm giving it a B minus. I was sorely tempted to give it a C, but the thing is, with rumors of Reggie Jackson possibly getting traded, let's see how that plays out.
I'm going to give the trade for Avery Bradley a mid-range B, just to be fair. And I'll explain it too. Of course it's a short term. Of course it's a good trade for Avery Bradley. It may not last in the long term, but what if the Pistons get better because of that? And what if Avery Bradley keeps getting better? Of course the Pistons still have Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson, but they also have Boban Marjanovic. They also have Tobias Harris. I mean, Boban Marjanovic isn't good defensively, but he can get better defensively. But more importantly, offensively, he's a machine. No matter how slow he is, he's a total machine. He's one tall guy, almost as tall as the Great Khali, a former WWE wrestler. Also, you got a bench player in Ish Smith. you got other bench players like Reggie Bullock, also signed to a short-term deal. You got Henry Ellenson developing. He had been playing great too the last few games of that past regular season. Got to use him more too. It's up to Stan Van Gundy, the head coach, to start using more of those hot hands. Could that all be short term? We don't know. I think most of this roster is even better than what most Piston fans think out there. And it's still a wait and see approach, but yeah, given the short term considerations of Avery Bradley, that might not last long. But then again, we'll have to see what happens. I give that a mid-range B. So that's our What's Our Grade segment for our audience, if they have grades for each event, post them in that comment bank below this episode. That's episode 73 of the Michigan Sports Truth Week in Review on Spreaker. Before we sign off, I want to remind everyone to share this episode and our entire podcast on social media and have their friends share that as well, because I want to tell them that the Michigan Sports Truth podcast is in search of local advertising sponsors. If anyone has a business that's interested in sponsoring this program, you can follow Sports Radio Detroit on Twitter at Sports Radio DET, at Sports Radio Det, and send them a direct message or email them at sportsradiodetroit.com in the contact section, or email its owner, Roger Castillo, at Rajcast81 at gmail.com. Also like their Facebook page and join their Facebook group, and finally find their podcasts available on iTunes and Podbean. Frank and Buck, thanks so much for filling in once again this week for Ed Smith. Hopefully he's doing okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's hanging in there, but I'm glad you guys decided to chip in again. Hopefully, if he's still gone, I'll have you guys do this again on episode 74.
Very good. All right.
So, for Frank Vajcner and Buck Geno, I'm Taylor Phillips. Follow me on Twitter at Buck Geno at DT2Phillips. Follow Buck Geno on Twitter at Buck Geno III in Roman numerals for Buck Geno III, and follow Frank Vajcner on Twitter at Frank underscore Vajcner, and like the Michigan Sports Truth Facebook page and join its Facebook group. We'll talk to you next week on episode 274. Thanks very much for listening. TTFN, ta-ta for now. Bon appetit.
Bon appetit.